Greetings and namaste. This is Shiva, your friendly wellness philosopher and guide, coming at you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So in my last video, if you're kind of following them in succession, I touched on first the great 5 elements in Ayurveda and Yoga, because they both basically descend from the same theory called Sankhya philosophy. That is part of the ways of seeing in ancient Indian culture. Well, it wasn't even called India then, so ancient culture that originated in the region of what is now known as the Indian, as known as the country of India, or the Indian subcontinent back in the day, or Bharat. But history and geography lesson aside, that's where it originated, and both Yoga and Ayurveda kind of use those concepts of Sankhya, and those were propagated by, as far as we know, Rishi Kapila, who was a great sage back in the day. Again, it's hard to put a time on these things because the written record for a lot of these philosophies came much later, and we don't really know how they were handed down in the oral tradition that most ancient civilizations and indigenous cultures had. But anyway, so we'll go on to the second great element. We already explored space, or Akasha, in the previous video. Let's move on to the next one, which is air, or vāyu. Now, vāyu is actually huge in Yoga. Yoga really focuses on the breath, because it sees breath as the bridge between the subtle and the gross. The subtle being our highest consciousness, and the gross being the most physical, tangible things we can set our hands on, which in our case usually is anything that is related to the element of earth, anything solid, or that we can touch and feel and smell and see. So each of the elements sort of builds on the previous one. So vāyu builds on space. If there was no space, air or vāyu would not have any place to move in. So space is essential for the other elements to start to manifest, and you kind of see that cascading effect as we explore these concepts further. Now, vāyu, like I said, is huge in Yoga. There's like 5 different vāyus we look at when we try to understand what a certain asana or pranayama, which is a breath technique, is trying to target and bring into balance. And any of these vāyus, when they're obstructed, basically makes us feel crummy and eventually can lead to disease, both psychologically, emotionally, and of course physically. So vāyu, or air, let's think about what that means, not just in terms of like hardcore Sankhya philosophy, and that's my objective here, to make it more accessible. Just think of it in everyday terms. What does air mean to you? What does vāyu mean to you? What are its qualities? So when you think about the qualities of air, we think about maybe breath. What does breath do? It's basically the physical manifestation of the life force that powers us. But it's not simply breath. It is such a complex amalgamation of different things that powers us, right? If you're simply breathing people, that would be a different thing. But we're much more than that, right? We breathe, and depending on how we breathe, we behave a certain way. The deeper the breath, the calmer maybe we feel. The deeper the breath, maybe the more inspired we feel. The deeper the breath, maybe the more energized we feel, right? So breathing is not as simple as simply inhaling, exhaling, and going on with your day. If you start to explore the qualitative nature of breath, there'll be a whole new world that opens up. That's what yoga hopes to do. From an Ayurvedic sense of view, breath is also, or a point of view, breath is also represents the quality of movement. So if our breath is restricted, our movement might be restricted. Our thoughts might be slower. We might not have air, or our breath, or vāyu, stoking the fire that we need to transform food into nourishment, to transform thoughts into action, to transform into the greatest version of ourselves. So air has like a cascading version down to the next element as well. And like we already explored, it needs a medium to move in. So air is pretty important, and my invitation to you is to think about air in terms of the role it plays in your life. How does it show up in your life? How does it show up psychologically? Does it show up in the clarity of your thought? and how you can, cultivate your air so it's focused on something for a certain point of time, or is it more helter-skelter like a summer breeze, blowing hither and thither, this way and that way, and not really getting anything of significance done. In terms of having basically too many distracting thoughts, in terms of having a lot of air physically in our joints, which leads to other diseases, like maybe arthritis or osteoporosis. Those are all diseases related to an overabundance of air and space, which is, as some of you might have caught on or know already, is vāta, one of the 3 body-mind humors in Ayurveda, and vāta is the combination of air and space. So think about what air means in your life, and maybe again, just take a couple of minutes to establish that personal connection to air. Maybe sit outdoors like I am in this backyard today and soak in that air. Soak it in maybe a couple of different times during the day, during the early morning hours, during sunset, during night, and see how air feels different as you take it in. Try that experiment for a week and come back. Let's hear maybe what windows of insight that might have opened up for you in terms of whatever's going on in your life. Did that move you to a different place? I'd love to hear that. So on that note, this is Shiva signing off. Be well and move like the breeze.